Ohio River tough to get by. Concert Tour is now taking the lead, and he's a length and a half in front, but Superstock is a fresh challenger in the center of the racetrack. And here comes Superstock outside of Concert Tour. Superstock has taken over the lead. Concert Tour has been defeated. Superstock, Ricardo Santana win the Arkansas Derby!
Welcome back to another Kentucky Derby episode here on Racing Rundown. Once again, we're going to be discussing the Kentucky Derby. I'm your host, Jack Sargent, and today we're joined by our friend Jay Privman of the Daily Racing Forum. Very excited to welcome Jay back on. It's been a while, but we're glad every time we can have him. We only get him a few times a year, so it's a privilege every time we get him. And without further ado, we're going to start off our discussion. We're not just going to talk about the Kentucky Derby, but also dive into the Kentucky Oaks and maybe mix in some other discussion of other undercard races on the show. So without any further delay, I'd like to welcome Jay on the show. Thank you for coming back, Jay. How's everything going?
My pleasure, Jack. Thanks for having me.
So obviously this Kentucky Derby is very exciting because it's the first time in over a year that we've had a May Kentucky Derby, obviously with everything that happened last year with the coronavirus, Derby having to be postponed. This is also the quickest turnaround between Kentucky Derbies, so that's another interesting point to bring up. But before we get into overall analyzing the race, I just wanted to ask you, because I know for people who follow you on Twitter, you were definitely saying some things that I very much agreed with about the post-draw, in particular to where certain horses drew and some people maybe using old wisdom that may not be as valid with the new Kentucky Derby, specifically with Known Agenda and talking about the one post being not as big of an issue as it used to be. What would you say about Known Agenda being in the one hole and some of the other post positions that in the past may not have been as beneficial for the horse, but with the new single starting gate aren't as big of a problem?
Well, yeah, the specific thing I was addressing was there seemed to be this knee-jerk reaction at the draw that, oh my God, Known Agenda got the rail. And the point that I was making was twofold. One, Known Agenda has shown, as he did in the Florida Derby, that he can run inside horses, take dirt, and keep going. But more importantly, and you just alluded to this regarding the starting gate, Churchill Downs now has a starting gate that all 20 horses can fit in. Previously, through the 2019 Derby, and including the 2019 Derby, when there were more than 14 horses, they'd use the 14-horse main gate and then a separate auxiliary gate that had 6 stalls in it. And, putting those things next to one another created a situation where the rail horse kind of started inside the gap a little bit at the 1 1/4 chute and kind of had to angle to the right to overcome that. Whereas now, since it's one gate and the big space that there is between the 14 and 15 posts has been eliminated, the gate can be placed at a spot where that horse doesn't have to make a right-hand turn. So it's not as, I don't think it's nearly as detrimental now as it had been previously. Any post can be good or bad depending on what happens, not only if you break poorly, but if horses next to you veer in or out. So I mean, you could have the best post you think you could get, like let's say 14, for instance. But if horses in 13 and 15 put the squeeze on you at the start, well, 14 might not have been all that great anyway. So the point I wanted to make, though, is just I think people were overreacting to the number one draw for Known Agenda, not thinking through the ramifications of the now 20-horse gate, and also not thinking through the ramifications of what kind of horse is there. A horse who has shown that he can run into dirt. So that was the points I was making regarding that.
And one final point to the starting gate, and I'm not sure that I've seen anyone bring up this point, but there hasn't been a winner from post 14 since Kerry back in 1961, and the 14 post was always the gate that the last one out before you got to the auxiliary gate, and sometimes you would have the horse from the 14 post be kind of stuck in the middle when horses are breaking in from the auxiliary gate. Do you think that the 14 post not being next to an auxiliary gate can also benefit essential quality?
I don't think that the 14 post was a bad post before. You have to realize a lot of these post statistics are extremely misleading, because there have been situations where if a horse was scratched, they would leave the inside gate open. But so let's say that there were 20 entered in the race, one horse is scratched, now 19 run. they would leave the rail or the inside gate open. But if you go and look at a chart, it's not going to show that horses broke from posts 2 through 20. It'll show that they were numbered based on where they were in the gate related to the others. In other words, 1 through 19. So if a horse in that specific field, won from the inside, it would go down as, he won from the rail, but he actually came out of the 2 stall, right? So I really think a lot of these post position statistics or theories that people have are not based on actual facts and evidence. So I really don't pay them a whole lot of mind, to be honest, because of the example I just gave you, and there's many others like that.
And you also have the point that no horses won from post 17, and that thing's completely irrelevant. It's just some fun stat that everyone likes to bring up every Kentucky Derby. But moving on to
the point I just made, I mean, there have been horses that might have won from 17, but they were not labeled as 17 because of the there was a scratch in the race. So it's not something that I would put any stock in, and I think people who do are foolish.
And now getting to stuff that's more substantive now, this Kentucky Derby is one of the more wide open ones in recent memory. You have a lot of horses that are coming out of strong races, but you also have a lot of horses that are question marks coming into this race. But getting to the morning line favorite, probably most likely the post-time favorite, Essential Quality. He has not done anything wrong in his career. 5 for 5, impressive in most of his career races. The one thing that is interesting about him, though, is he is coming off of a visual regression between the Southwest and the Bluegrass, but there's also a different angle of it that if you look at the Bluegrass, that was some people, you could say that he was challenged in the Breeders' Cup and had to fight for it, but really had another horse dig in against him in the Bluegrass for the first time. So there's a positive and a negative to look at with that. How do you think Essential Quality is coming into this Kentucky Derby?
I thought his last race was actually quite good because Highly Motivated was the only speed in the race, and Essential Quality had to be the one to take him on and go after him. And he still was able to overcome that. And the thing that I find admirable about Essential Quality is that he has shown that he can lay close if the pace is soft like it was in the Bluegrass, or he can lag back and blast home if the pace is hot like it was in the Breeders' Cup. He's run at 3 different tracks in his 5 races, and he's won on all 3 of those tracks, including at Churchill Downs in his debut. And he's won on an off track like he did at Oaklawn, and he's won on fast tracks. So to me, really the only knock that you can put on Essential Quality is that he's going to be a short price in a big field.
And now looking at some of the other horses, the second choice on the board is the Santa Anita Derby winner, Rock Your World. And he's coming out of a very impressive victory in the Santa Anita Derby. What do you think about him after that Santa Anita Derby, coming into the Kentucky Derby against horses that probably he hasn't faced the likes of Essential Quality and some of the other horses in this Kentucky Derby? How do you think he'll fare getting a real challenge for the first time?
Well, he might have had a real challenge last time. Medina Spirit, who finished second, had won the Robert Lewis, and he had finished well chasing Life is Good a couple of times. So I'm not sure that Rock Your World was running against inferior competition compared to the Kentucky Derby. I think he beat a legitimately good field last time. The thing about Rock Your World, he does have the highest buyer speed figure last time out of the 100. And the thing that was nice about his race is that there was other speed in the race, and he took the track from them and led from start to finish. The things that are, to me, that are concerning from a handicapping standpoint is I do think the Santa Anita track that day favored speed and being drawn towards the inside, and I think he benefited from that. And I don't know how he'll react if he doesn't get the lead to the point where there's some kickback. If he's sitting outside horses in the clear, I think he'll be fine. But let's say hypothetically he breaks a half step slow. He's never had dirt kickback in his face before. He had 2 grass races, and then he led from start to finish in his lone dirt race. So I think the outside draw for him is beneficial because he has the potential to get a clear trip from out there. But I do think the start is paramount because I don't know how he'll react if he has to come from 6th or 7th with a spray of dirt in his face.
Now, that actually brings up a good point to get to Medina Spirit now, and I may have just been guilty of this, but certainly there are going to be a lot of people that are going to overlook Medina Spirit because he hasn't won a stake race since the Bob Lewis, and he was second well beaten in both the San Felipe by Life is Good and Rock Your World in the Santa Anita Derby. But the old adage is underestimate Bob Baffert at your own risk because they've got the same trainer jockey combination as the last year's Kentucky Derby winner. How do you think Medina Spirit is going to run in the Kentucky Derby this year?
I think he's going to run very well. I mean, if you said, here's horse X, and horse X has only been beaten by 2 horses, Life is Good and Rock Your World. He's finished in front of everybody else. And Life is Good is not running, and Rock Your World's going to be maybe the second or third choice in the race. And horse X is going to be double digits. You'd be like, where do I sign up for that? That sounds like good value. I think Medina Spirit is very, very overlooked, as you put it. I think that's an accurate assessment of him. He's never run a bad race. He's never finished worse than second. He's only been beaten by 2 horses in his life. One of them's not even in the race. And would have been the favorite if he'd kept on the path he was going on. So I think this is a very dangerous horse for a trainer who we know knows how to win the race and knows how to train to win the race. So I think he's very dangerous.
Do you think there's an opportunity with Medina Spirit because he's breaking to the inside of the majority of the speed in this race? Do you think there's a chance that Medina Spirit, because when he's run his best races, it's been when he's on the lead. Do you think there's a chance that Medina Spirit could break well, get to the lead, and Johnny Velasquez could steal it on the lead in a way that he did it last year with Authentic?
Well, he wasn't on the lead the whole way with Authentic last year on a soft pace. I think this race has the potential with the bigger field and where horses are drawn, for instance, Soup and Sandwich being in post 19. Some of these horses are going to have to go early, Rock Your World as well, just to establish forward position. So I don't think the pace is going to be lightning fast, but I think it's going to be quicker than it was last year. So I'd be surprised, going back to your question, I'd be surprised if Medina Spirit got the lead and set the kind of fractions that Authentic did and led from start to finish. I don't see that scenario playing out.
Now, you mentioned Soup and Sandwich. We'll get to the Florida Derby now, and obviously the winner, Known Agenda, who we talked about a little bit with the post position, but looking at Known Agenda purely in terms of what he's done in his career with his 2 most recent victories in that Gulfstream Park Allowance where he won by open lengths and then the Florida Derby. What's your opinion on Known Agenda? The blinkers have obviously seemed to have helped him in his career. How much of an impact have those blinkers had, and how do you think what kind of trip do you think he's going to work out in this Kentucky Derby in order to be able to run his A race?
Well, the blinkers, to your first question, the blinkers have obviously made a huge difference. He's run 2 terrific races since they were added. That I think the evidence is overwhelming there that they've moved him forward. As for a trip, being drawn inside, he's probably going to have to save some ground and eat some dirt, but he's shown that he can do that. And then it'll just be up to a Rad Ortiz, depending on how bunched the field is or spread out the field is, as to how he'll try and pick his way through traffic. If the field gets spread out, he might be able to save more ground and sort of gradually angle to the outside, or maybe even continue up the rail if other horses are leaving a path open for him. If the field is bunched and they really back the pace up, it's going to make it potentially more challenging for him to weave his way through mid-pack. He's going to have to try and probably get outside at some point and go around horses. So a lot of it's just going to depend on how spread out the field gets in the early going, and that's an impossible thing to know for sure until it happens. But obviously Ortiz is riding better than anybody in the country right now, and I'm sure he'll make a good decision because he seems to do that more often than not.
And now moving on to the fourth choice on the odds board is Hot Rod Charlie, the runner-up in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile from last year. And he's coming out of a spectacular race in the Louisiana Derby when he led most of the way and was able to set a track record at that track, going 1 mile and 3/16. He was a horse who early on in his career was kind of spinning his wheels a little bit, but has definitely seemed to have turned it on following that maiden victory and then his second place finish in the Breeders' Cup. What do you think about his Louisiana Derby win last out, and how can his versatility help him in the Kentucky Derby?
Yeah, I liked his win a lot, Jack. He had trained very well coming out of his first start of the year in the Robert Lewis as he moved on towards the Louisiana Derby, and he ran to those works. And now I think he's continued on an upward cycle. He's had an unusual schedule. It was 6 weeks between those two starts. Now it's another 6 weeks to the Derby, but he seems to have thrived with that schedule. So I think the people who have him have found what works best for that specific horse, and they're going to continue to do that. And to your point, I think the versatility that he has makes him dangerous, because he has shown that he can sit back and finish, or as he showed in the Louisiana Derby, you can put him in the race and he'll go on with it. And I think in the Kentucky Derby, it's usually to your advantage to be forwardly placed and to try and avoid as much traffic as you can. And I would think that in the case of Hot Rod Charlie, at the least they'll ride him away from the gate just to establish a forward position. And then depending on how fast or slow they're going, then you make decisions from there as to how aggressive you want to be early on or not. But I think his versatility is definitely one of his strong points.
And now moving on to another horse from the Louisiana Derby that I wanted to get your thoughts on is Mandalon, one of Brad Cox's two runners in this Kentucky Derby. And the thing about Mandalon, a lot of people have been talking about the Louisiana Derby, which was definitely, it seems to be a bit of an aberration, but there's not a lot to explain what happened in the Louisiana Derby. How do you think Mandalon's going to run in the Kentucky Derby? Do you think, like a lot of people do, that he's a rebound candidate in this race?
I don't know, and I don't know how anybody can confidently predict what he's going to do, because his Louisiana Derby was so poor, and there was no reason for it that could be found, that you're basically taking a leap of faith that he deserves a mulligan. And I'm not sure that he's superior to this field to say, you know what, I'm just going to draw a line through that. He'll bounce back and he's better than the rest of these. I'm not there. I know he's getting a lot of support, and I think he's going to be an underlay compared to what his price should be. And I'm against him. I just don't see how you can take a complete leap of faith that he's going to bounce back and do better. Look, if he stood out over the rest of the field and he was going to be 10 or 12 to 1, then maybe you'd be like, you know what, it's worth my while to give him the mulligan. But I don't think he stands out from the field, and I have a feeling he's going to be underlaid from what his price should be. So I'm going to be taking a stand against him.
And one interesting thing about this Kentucky Derby is there's three horses in the race that have only had one start at 3, and with two of those horses, the interesting thing is that their one start has been at the 1 mile and 1/16 distance, and no horse has won the Kentucky Derby with their final start being 1 mile and 1/16 since Charismatic in 1999. One of those horses is Helium, who is undefeated and is rather high for an undefeated horse. It makes sense why, because he's relatively unproven. What do you think of Helium coming off the layoff from from the Tampa Bay Derby? And do you think he has a shot to surprise some people in here?
No, I don't give him any chance whatsoever. I thought the Tampa Bay Derby was about the weakest point scoring race that there was in this sequence. His buyer figure was an 84. If you look at the horses who were in there and how they did coming out of that race, they all underachieved. So I find him hard to make a case for.
Now, the Wood Memorial was another race that, in terms of time, came back really slow. But there are three horses in the Kentucky Derby from the Wood Memorial. Do you like any of the three horses coming out of the Wood Memorial? And if so, which one do you feel the most optimistic about?
I'll answer the second part of that question first. The one that I feel the most optimistic about is Dynamic One. I think he's got the most upside. He seems to be a late developing kind of horse who's going to be really good down the line. I just don't think he's quite there yet for May the 1st. And then to your, the first part of your question, I don't like anybody coming out of that race. I thought it was a poor race overall. I didn't see any excuse for Brooklyn Strong, who's just had one race since the Remsen, and I thought had a pretty soft trip in the wood with just a minimal amount of insignificant trouble. So I'm against the horses that are coming out of the Wood Memorial. For the Derby, I do think Dynamic One is a horse to keep an eye on for later on this year, because he strikes me as the kind of horse who's going to continue to progress as we move along towards the summer and fall.
Now, we talked about highly motivated a little bit earlier with the post position conversation, but looking at what he's actually done as a racehorse, he had some problems go wrong with him in his first start, but showed up really well in the Bluegrass. Do you think the Bluegrass is a picture of what's to come with highly motivated and indicative of a strong Kentucky Derby run coming, or is he going to be in for a rude awakening on Derby Day?
I think he's a nice horse, but when you look at the Bluegrass and then you try and extrapolate it out to the Derby, I think it's a completely different kind of situation. And the Bluegrass, as we were talking about in the context of essential quality, highly motivated had the lead to himself that day, and it was a fairly moderate pace that he was able to set. And that was his first try going 2 turns at a mile and an eighth. And he couldn't quite hold off essential quality. And to me, that was highly motivated's chance to make an impact. And if he couldn't win in that situation, where to me the conditions were optimum for him, I find it hard to think that he's going to face more pace pressure and have to go an extra furlong and still do better than he did in the Bluegrass. That just doesn't add up to me. So I would be very surprised if he's around as a prominent horse at the end of the race.
And another horse that jumped onto the Derby scene very late toward the end of the prep season. I personally was not even expecting to be talking about Superstock in the Kentucky Derby, but Superstock, the not surprise winner of the Arkansas Derby, but upset winner. I think that with the way the public was looking at Concert Tour, that it seemed, at least if you look at the way that the public was betting him, they thought it was a foregone conclusion. But given the surprise factor of the Arkansas Derby, how well do you think Superstock can run in this Kentucky Derby?
He's an improving horse. I thought he got a real nice setup in the Arkansas Derby. It was a hot contested pace, and it certainly played right into his lap. And he looks like he's making some steady progress. So I'd be surprised if he won, but it wouldn't surprise me if he ran well, just because he seems to be headed the right direction. But I thought he got a real advantageous pace situation last time in a small field, not like a 20-horse Derby field. There were only 6 runners in the Arkansas Derby. So I could see him running well, but it's hard for me to make enough of a scenario where he ends up in the winner's circle.
And one final thing, one thing that I always like to look for in every Kentucky Derby is a horse that is not necessarily going to be a win candidate, but one that's going to be at big odds, has a chance to run in the top 4 and fill out the bottom of exotic wagers. If you're looking at this year's Kentucky Derby, what horse do you think has the best chance to be that horse that is the big long shot that fills out everyone's exotic wagers?
For me, Jack, it's King Fury. Here's why. I mean, obviously, he's only had the one start at 3. He's one of those horses, kind of like Helium, who you were talking about earlier. One start at 3, going a mile and a 16th. The thing about King Fury that I find appealing is that he was really hammered on as a 2-year-old. They kept running him back in 2 weeks, then back in 3 weeks, and back in 3 weeks again. And I think at the end of the year, he'd kind of lost his form because they went to the well one too often and he needed a break. But he's by Curlin. Curlin didn't even race as a 2-year-old. So to me, this horse has a right to be a lot better at 3 than he was at 2. And he's out of a flatter mare, which also would indicate a horse who's going to get better with age and like Curlin with distance. And so to me, there's the very real possibility that the strong performance that we saw from King Fury in his lone race as a 3-year-old indicates that he's a lot better at 3 than he was at 2. Now, people would argue against, if you want to take the contrary opinion on him, you'd be like, look, he got a pace set up, which he did, and it was on an off track, which it was, and he's probably not going to get those conditions on Saturday. But my thinking is that from an exotic standpoint, he's good value if my theory is correct, that he's a lot better at 3 than he was at 2, and people are still kind of looking at him only through, they're looking at the totality of his body of work and kind of discounting him owing to how he ran as a 2-year-old, and not taking the position I am, which is that you've got to look at him through a different prism now. This is a better, more mature, stronger horse at 3, and he might be a lot better than you think he was. So he would be my horse to fit that bill of what you were asking about, of a long shot to blow up the gimmicks.
And then one final thing on the card. This is a very fun card outside of the Kentucky Derby. Is there any other horse in any of the undercard races that you feel strongly about this weekend?
Yeah, I'm going to gamble on the Pat Day Mile. I do these analyses for the Daily Racing Form after all the point-scoring prep races, and I thought Defunded ran a sneaky good race in the Santa Anita Derby. We were talking earlier about how Rock Your World took advantage of what I thought was a good profile for him that day. You wanted to be inside, you wanted to be forwardly placed, and Defunded was in the same race but did not get the same kind of trip. He was wide, he was chasing, and it was only the 3rd start of his career, and only the second start as a 3-year-old. And I thought he ran a lot better than he had a right to, considering the way the race unfolded. Now he's going to cut back to a 1-turn mile in a race where it looks like there'll be some pace, and hopefully he can get a good trip and do well there. And there's another horse in that race who I've kind of abused in my repeatedly in my analyses, and it's not really the horse's fault, it's more his people's fault, but I think Sitting on Go has been a completely mismanaged horse since he won the Iroquois last year. They've fed him a steady diet of 2-turn races, and initially you have to give him a try at 2 turns, but after the first 2 or 3 times when he showed he couldn't handle it, to come back for a 4th and 5th try, to me, was just the height of insanity. Is just trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, now they're finally going to come to their senses and cut him back to a 1-turn mile, which is, I think, what he wants to do. So if that race comes in Defunded over Sitting on Go, drinks are on me.
And I will say, for the record, I did go Sitting on Go on top, so I think both Jay and I are gambling on a radioactive pace early that kind of blows up the race at the bottom. But anyways, thank you for coming by, Jay. Hopefully it's a fun Derby weekend for us and we can get some winners.
No, always fun doing it, Jack. Thank you.
Back after 3 quarters in 112-1, Known Agenda is now on to take over the lead. It's Known Agenda and Irad Ortiz Jr. now moving away from Soup and Sandwichers back to 2nd. Then Greatest Honor and Nova Rags, 16th to go. It's Pletcher in the Derby again. It's Known Agenda for St. Elias Stable under Irad Ortiz Jr. 2.5.